Hello, everyone. We welcome you back to another episode of the Cosmic Matrix Podcast with your hosts Bernhard and Laura Matsu. And we just came back from a little personal, quote-unquote, retreat in the forest from a cabin we stayed at for a few days and took a much-needed break from the digital world, specifically social media and computer and all of that. And also took a break because we just finished one of our courses, the second one, Embodied Soul Awakening course, which was, again, another great journey we embarked on with 25 people. And next week we're starting the third one. But we just needed a break for ourselves, right? To self-reflect, to go inward, and just to retreat, so to speak, and recharge out in nature and kind of disconnect from the external world and the digital world, and really also engage in our own inner work. And what we also realized in a way, or we got quite a few inquiries from people, especially in this day and age, as more and more people are quote unquote waking up. They understand something needs to change. The outside world, what's happening is crazy right now, obviously, and there's only so much we can do to change the external world. So I see a lot of people realize the need to change within, right? And hence some people ask, what is inner work? How do I start? What do I do? How can I change myself? And we're not talking about a self-development program of just motivational Anthony Robbins style speakers, but really diving into deeper inner work. And, we want to really focus this or dedicate this podcast on asking the question or answering the question, what is true inner work?
Yeah. And I think now, especially since there's been a collective trauma through, everything that happened in 2020, which I don't need to go into detail about because everyone's aware. Right. So people are processing a lot more emotionally and spiritually. And in many ways, this chaos has really pushed people to a tipping point where they're no longer able to be comfortable enough and asleep enough in their lives to just kind of go along with things as they were. So they're really kind of reaching either a dark night of the soul, or the craziness of the world has made it so maybe their old coping mechanisms are no longer working anymore. So it's really catalyzed a lot of more people to start engaging in deep inner work. And when we talk about inner work, I think the main distinction is, self-motivational work sometimes can be improving on the ego, basically, like creating a shinier and shinier ego. And then to contrast that, there's a lot of people who do inner work and then get caught up in spiritual materialism, and then they make a shinier and shinier spiritual ego for themselves. So with this process of inner work, we're really working with the concept of self-remembering, meaning bringing our awareness, 80% awareness into our own body, into our own experience, our thoughts, emotions, perceptions, and 80% on the external world. And that's a term by Gurdjieff, right? Originally, self-remembering.
Yeah.
Yeah. I learned about it from Red Hawk, who's a really great teacher. He has a book called that. And then self-observation. So being able to observe your thoughts, observe your emotions from a place of like witnessing them, so not reacting to them. And this goes contrary to most of the world. Most people are acting very unconsciously. They're very reactionary as well. Even us on the spiritual path or on the path of like self-knowledge, we have our moments where we are like that. So we really want to define inner work as more of a soulful process. It's more about bringing your spirit and soul to the front, removing the obstructions that allow you to live in essence, your true nature. So it's not really about becoming a better person, but becoming more of who you are, I think.
Yeah. And then a lot of, if you go deeper, and you made a good point, which I hinted at as well. The inner work we're talking about is not as Adyashanti would say it as well, it's not a personality development program in terms of, perfecting your personality, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
The personality itself is not to be demonized. The ego is not to be demonized, but it needs to become a vessel for something much deeper, right? As we can call the soul, the psychic being, essence, which we go deep into it as well. But as you said, before we can really truly start inner work, we need to be able to observe ourselves. And that's really the prerequisite self-observation. And various different teachings throughout the ages have also said the same thing, to understand the different parts within yourselves, because we have a physical being, the physical body, right? Then there's the psychological body, the mental body, and the spiritual body, right? So to speak.
And the emotional body too.
And the emotional, 4 parts, people, depending what teaching you look at, 3 or 4 parts, and they intersect, and we mistake one part for the other, right? Hence, especially also in this day and age, an integral holistic approach is needed, which we also use in our, apply in our courses, calling it the 4-fold approach of holistic self-work, really like on the physical, emotional, psychological, and spiritual level.
Yeah, because we are holistic beings.
Exactly.
We want to look at the whole person and not just an aspect of it.
Exactly. Most, modern, or not modern or traditional psychology just works almost on the mental aspect, like talk therapy, of trying to reason yourself out of it, which can be a trap in itself. I've been there, like, just because your quote unquote issues or childhood wounding or whatever trauma you went through intellectually, mentally, and even the story, you can fool yourself. Oh, now I understand why this happened, so now I've healed. But the body still holds it.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. And that's the importance of the somatic work as well, Yeah. And a lot of, and honestly, the process of inner work is a painful process. It creates a crisis in consciousness, because the first thing that's going to happen is like your ego's idea of who you are, how great you are, how perfect you are, gets shattered the moment that you start to observe yourself and to observe your own mechanical nature, your own patterns that come from either social, cultural patterns, that come from ancestral patterns, that can even come from past lives, which is what evolutionary astrology goes into. And the signature of self-development, of developing humility, is seen by Virgo in the 6th house. And this creates a crisis of consciousness, because, from the development of the creative self, then we kind of which is seen by Leo, then we kind of take a step back and we start to be like, okay, I need to observe myself. I need to develop true humility. I need to work on myself, So there's this almost like quest to like perfect the soul that needs to be developed, as well, which can be a double-edged sword too, because if taken too far, it can create almost like a way of beating yourself up, of like making yourself always feel not good enough. That's kind of the Virgo 6th house core wound, is like almost like using this process of self-development to
over perfectionism.
Yeah, to be too hard on yourself, and it can manifest as an internalized inner critic, Yes. So we
Very
need to
familiar.
kind of, walk a fine line with that. Because this is how it kind of like works on an axis. And this is why I find it very interesting, especially now, is that we're at the end of the Piscean age, right? So this is all about, this is why we see anything from the rise of like the victim, to the rise of this kind of spirituality and Christ consciousness and everything in between, and even mental illness is part of the Pisces 12th house axis. So that's one part of it, but it works on an axis, as I said. So then on the polar evolutionary side of it, it's the 6th house in Virgo. So the more that we actually work on developing true humility through the ability to observe ourselves, to perfect ourselves, to work on the parts of ourselves that, aren't in line with our true nature. It's really about purification to the self, to the greater, that's the more that we can do, that is to the extent that we actually end up developing these higher states of consciousness, higher states of awareness. So they work hand in hand. So since we're at the end of this kind of Piscean age for the next 100 years, you're going to see qualities of both Virgo and Pisces trying to balance itself out in our individual lives on a micro perspective, on a macro perspective as well, so that's what you kind of see going on.
Yeah. Very, very interesting. So I want to just share a quote real quick from Gurdjieff, as he was quoted in the book In Search of the Miraculous by Ouspensky, and he talks exactly about the necessity to self-observation before we can even start into inner work. And he goes, knowledge of oneself is very big. Let me start again. Knowledge of oneself is a very big, but a very vague and distant aim. Man in his present state is very far from self-knowledge. Therefore, strictly speaking, his aim cannot even be defined as self-knowledge. Self-study must be his big aim. It is quite enough if a man understands that he must study himself. It must it must be man's aim to begin to study himself, to know himself in the right way. So that also ties into the ultimate, ancient saying of know thyself, know thy true self, gaining self-knowledge. And Gurdjieff continues, self-study is the work or the way which leads to self-knowledge. But in order to study oneself, one must first learn how to study, where to begin, what methods to use. A man must learn how to study himself, and he must study the methods of self-study. The chief method of self-study is self-observation. Without properly applied self-observation, a man will never understand the connection and the correlation between the various functions of his machine. Will never understand how and why on each separate occasion everything in him just happens. So he talks about the machine, our inner, our whole being, so to speak, in these different parts, to be able to observe how they interact. So this self-observation ties into self-remembering, which is the deeper aspect of really like being aware of your inner and outer at the same time, as you just talked about. But self-observation is key. So on the practical level, what does it even mean to self-observe yourself? Well, it means to really develop that inner witness, right? Because most of the time, as you just talked about, we engage in life extremely mechanically, right? We're just on autopilot without knowing, driven by unconscious impulses. We get identified with what we do, and everywhere we check out, we're disassociated. We have lost the inner witness. We're not really conscious of what we're doing.
Mm-hmm. And there's also zero focus in Western culture on developing that objective awareness, So it's also, our conditioning from society's standpoint is more about look outside of you for answers. So it actually goes polar opposite to the conditioning that we have, Yeah.
So, so what it means on the practical self-observe to is, whatever emotions arise, to observe the emotion that are happening to you without kind of identifying. That's the key point as well. Disidentification.
Yes.
Right? That's, you read in any esoteric teaching, it's not to identify with what you do, not identify with the emotions, which doesn't mean to disassociate from the emotions, like checking out, still being able to feel it, but you're not that.
Yeah, it's like that quote, I forget. I think it's Rumi, actually. He said, like, feelings are just visitors, And then there's this famous quote by Thich Nhat Hanh where he's like, he talks about how, imagine yourself in the middle of a room with a bunch of doors, and thoughts and emotions come in through the doors, and they just come in through a door and then they leave. And you have a chair in front of you, and you're never supposed to actually invite any of the thoughts to stay in front of you. You just observe them come in and leave. And that's kind of how these thoughts and emotions come in through and leave through our consciousness. We could have the most intense emotion, even like related to like past life traumas that gets triggered in this life, But through our own ability to develop a quality of consciousness, we can actually observe that emotion, let it rise up. And also it's emotional intelligence. Like, like healing is more just the capacity to hold difficult emotions. Not that you never experience difficult emotions ever again. You just become more able to witness them, observe them, process them, and let them go.
Yeah.
So that's the whole training that people get into when you meditate properly, which in my view it has to be meditation ideally focused on the body where all the memories are stored, so you notice the uprising of emotion, and then you're able to be with it, observe it without identifying with it, and let it leave. And that's really hard in itself, because for the most part, as soon as people start to focus on their body, our minds are going a million miles a minute for most people. So the moment that they start to focus on their body, what happens is like thoughts come up and like, oh, I need to do this. I need to do this. I need to do this. So the first thing you observe is actually through meditation is the chaos of your own mind and how crazy you are. That's why it's called training the mind. You're training the mind to be able to be more present and still. Yeah. And that honestly, there's some people who don't have an inner narrative, but for people who have an inner narrative, that takes like some sustained practice. It's not just a week going to a Vipassana retreat or something. You have to do that every single day because it's a practice. And the more that you practice doing it, the more that you're able to kind of witness yourself in your everyday life without attaching to the emotions. You develop that kind of mental strength.
Yeah. It reminds me also, like, what Gurdjieff referred to, when you really sincerely observe yourself, and I can definitely relate to that. When you really sincerely establish the inner witness, observe yourself, the different parts. You see the emotions, feelings rising up, how this relate to thoughts coming in, your physical sensations, and all of that, and the correlating actions and behaviors. What I realized early on as well in myself, and still do, is my mechanical nature of the personality. Right, this is just slave to certain to unconscious trauma, unconscious wounds that drive my actions, my behaviors in everyday life.
Yeah,
which I mistake as my conscious action, but it's extremely mechanical, and you can really observe it. It's like that how little control, little free will we actually have, if any at all. And that realization is what Gurdjieff called coming face to face with the horror of the situation. Right, to see the lies we've been telling ourselves and all this stuff coming up, or anything we just avoid, and again, all these desires we even have, which we just mistake as even mistake as our soul. That's what Gurdjieff talked the false desire soul, right? With a lot of desires or ambitions and aims we have are actually based on wounding and trauma, and very reactive, of filling holes, of filling anything that has disconnected us from our true nature. Yeah. So it is, this deeper, sincere self-work takes sincerity, right?
Yeah.
And commitment, and discipline, and a lot of people I see, and I can see it in myself, a lot of people we've worked with as well, they're unconscious defense mechanisms.
Yes.
Right?
The complexes,
that keep us actually away from doing this engaging inner work. And I've been recently getting back into A.H. Alma's work of the Diamond Approach, also very Gurdjieff, his work.
He's inspired by a lot of different teachers.
And he talked also, like, the problem with a lot of people engaging in the work, they lack the discipline, the will, and the commitment, right? Because that's, like I said, it's easy to talk about this work, but the rubber hits the road when you really engage in it, and it's not fun. Even what you mentioned with meditation, I still see myself, you sit truly meditation without checking out, disassociating, you see like, oh my God, these thoughts are just randomly coming from the past, this and that, and how little control you literally have it, and how it takes a lot of, quote, effort to train your mind.
It takes a lot
to not identify with these thoughts.
And actually, I think it was Kuladasa. He has this thing, this image of the 10 stages of training the mind. He's a meditation teacher. And it actually takes way more effort in the beginning as well. So to train the monkey mind, basically. And it's not that you're trying to it's not that you're trying to eliminate the mind or eliminate thoughts. It's that you want to be the master of your mind, not have your mind be the master of you, basically. And actually what you said, I'm going to just read this quote from Reggie Ray, because he talks about this kind of process that happens in meditation. And he says, in the course of the day, there's a huge buildup of sludge in our system of unprocessed experiences or things that happened. And if we give our mind and our spirit the peace, the space, and the silence, even for a relatively short period of time, all of that buildup, all of that sludge, all of those unresolved issues that cause so much anxiety and fear and apprehension and even dread, they get worked through. If you relax and let your experience unfold, your mind will find its way home. And home means back to your fundamental, open, connected, warm, joyful state of being. So that's what happens is we don't actually process experiences in the moment. We actually tend to armor ourselves up from them, especially difficult experiences or any experiences. But I would say generally in the state of the world, there's a huge amount of armoring, which is seen as body tension, which is seen as chronic illness. Even it can develop into cancer or more severe illness if we don't process our experiences.
Right.
So when people first get into meditation, especially, and I'm really referring to body-based meditation where you're keeping the awareness in the body, not something where you go somewhere else, which that's a whole other topic on its own. What they first experience is this backlog from literally their whole life. That's what's stored in the body. And that's why it takes more effort in the beginning to engage in this process of somatic work, because there's a backlog there. And so you have to backtrack. Maybe you have 10 breakups or something you didn't process. Right. Like me, when I first started getting in meditation and I was so cut off from my feelings, I actually went through intensely traumatic experiences, and I wasn't able to cry and process them until I started my own yoga and meditation process, and that helped open the body enough so that the experience could unfold and be processed to completion. And the important thing to know is that even though that's really not fun, and it's in the sense that a lot of painful emotions can come up, it's really necessary in order for you to live your life to your greatest potential, or as your true self, or retrieve your essence. Because as long as those patterns are held in your body, it's going to manifest as complexes in your life, and that's going to seek resolution by you drawing towards you exactly the same experiences. Right. I forget what the term is called. It's called some sort of repetition compulsion, basically. So people are wondering, why do I keep having the same type of relationship? Why do I keep having the same type of experience? In my view, it's because something in the body is seeking, and the psyche as well, is seeking to be resolved. So you keep drawing.
It's seeking wholeness, right?
It's seeking wholeness. So you keep drawing the same experience until you figure that out. But you can actually just process it internally through this process of inner work, and then resolve it, and then that will change the consciousness to the point you no longer.
And the
draw
point
it.
is to make the unconscious conscious. I mean, as the famous quote by Carl Gustav Jung, as he said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but making the darkness conscious, which means the unconscious conscious, which also ties into the distorted form of reality creation, because people then think, oh, I attract the wrong partner, wrong situation, because I'm just negative, and I need to just visualize a positive outcome. You can do this like ad nauseum, right? But it will not change anything out there unless you make the darkness conscious, until you release or heal that within that keeps attracting that.
Yeah, and this is also very multifaceted work. It's also different. It like what one person needs may be actually pulling another person back into the past, So like, as far as like,
what do you mean pulling another person back?
Meaning like, so I'm thinking of actually the north nodes. So like, if one person has a north node in Pisces, for instance, what they need to develop is like compassion, surrender. They actually need to work on more, developing more of this kind of relationship to the divine. But if you have a north node in Virgo, you actually need to get organized, disciplined. You know what I mean? They actually work on an axis, but I'm saying that like as far as like practical suggestions, like what one person, what may be spiritual bypassing for one person may actually be the medicine for another person.
That's a very
so that's also important because a lot of people sometimes are like, oh yeah, just give us a list of things to do. Just one, 2, 3, 4, 5 practical suggestions. But for me, even if I like, so how I do my sessions with people in the group, I'm not doing sessions with people right now, but how I do astrology sessions is I look at the chart right ahead of time and get a basic feel, but I don't make any assumptions until I actually talk to the person. So we need to also be really mindful, these kind of quick fix, like 5 things you need to do to heal your shadow or whatever. It's not actually holistic. It's not humanistic either. It doesn't look at the whole person. It doesn't look at the choices they make.
At the individual.
It doesn't. Yeah, we need to also really bring in the individual and the individual journey, because we're each on a very different trajectory. And yeah, there's definitely tools which can be used across a wide array of people, but we are each on an individual journey with this. So that's also why Bernhard and I tend to deter away from these kind of quick fix solutions, because we're very humanistic in our approach and we actually look at the whole person, and not only just the whole person, but like how are, when you look at an astrology chart, for instance, what are the choices this person has made in their lives? What's the quality of the consciousness? You can't make assumptions about an astrology chart, in my opinion, until you actually talk to the person and see what they're struggling with.
And also in terms of astrology, I mean, our listeners also know this already. I mean, astrology has become diluted, distorted, the mainstream new age in many different ways. The astrology swamp runs deep too, but we were talking about deeper esoteric evolutionary astrology, which you have talked a lot about as well, which we also use in our programs, as in particular the Pluto node placements, Uranus and all of that, but in context of then engaging in the somatic inner work or spiritual work as well. So it's not just getting lost, because easily we've talked about this before. People can use astrology as a spiritual bypass as well by just getting finding reason, getting too identified with their placement, so to speak.
Yeah,
right? And
yeah.
then not actually engaging in the work.
Well, evolutionary astrology is just meant to actually link us back into the natural cycles, into natural law, which we've been very disconnected from. That's the whole point. And then when the psyche has some sense of order within it by understanding the natural cycles of nature, then and we also remove the things that are constructing us in our astrology chart, like difficult placements or whatever that we're struggling with, then your evolutionary journey should unfold as it naturally should,
Right.
That's the whole point, is not to give you like answers on like, this is what's going to happen for the next week, but so that you can have an understanding of the natural unfoldment of the cycles of the universe, and that creates that sense of peace.
Yeah.
Everything, in my opinion, everything that people are looking for in astrology reports is that sense of comfort and peace, that you understand the natural cycles of the universe.
What they're really looking for, most people, like even when they go to psychic, tarot reading, astrology, two topics are the biggest one: money and relationships.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. But what they're looking for is something deeper, which we're going to touch upon.
They're looking for their
shortly.
essence.
Exactly, their essence. But I want to touch upon what you just mentioned as well, because it's very important. And the reason why we did this podcast and call it "What is Inner Work," because we get sometimes messages, emails. People ask me, like even recently, like, what is this inner work you refer to all the time? I can't see anything, on your website. There's so much information. Can you give me like a guide how to do inner work and all of that? But as Laura just said, there's no 10 steps of like, you need to do this and this and this and this, right? I mean, there are many of these clickbait type shortcut articles, videos out there, right? Which I feel, my humble opinion, do more harm than good in the long run. Because what I've realized, we both have realized in our own process, and little we haven't worked with thousands of people over the decade, is the individual process is different from one person to another.
Yeah.
In other words, what works for one doesn't necessarily work for another. And yes, there are general rules how apply to everyone, but how this specifically manifests for the person is different from person to person.
Yeah.
Which we also realized even in our group coaching program, which we're taking 25 people on a journey, right? We're in the boat together. So there are universal laws, natural laws, and certain processes which apply to everyone, but how it specifically works is different for each to each. And I find that's why, you have helped me with that as well. Evolutionary astrology gives a lot of insight to the unique individual process, because even with the node placements, like for some people, they're maybe not even supposed to be in a quote unquote committed relationship.
Well, not that they're not supposed to, but like if they
the lessons are different,
if they keep falling back, like if their south node is in Libra or the 7th house or something, there's a tendency to actually fall back on relationships. So maybe they actually need to develop the individual will more,
Yeah.
and also, like that's the main process of inner work, is being able to forge your own pathway forward. And I think we live in a very Gemini age where like people just kind of skim the surface of every single topic and they never really go deep. Yeah. And that's the issue. That's the spiritual materialism.
Then they feel sorry to interrupt, the resistance comes in once they go deeper, unconscious self-sabotage, self-defeating mechanisms.
Yeah.
Because of the lack of what H. Almas talked about of commitment. Because he made a really good point. When we commit to something, you reference it as well, because deeper inner work will result in an inner death of the personality we're very attached to.
Yeah.
Right? We may completely destroy, we'll be challenged to the image we have of ourselves, all our beliefs, all identification of who we think we are.
And that's painful for the ego.
Extremely painful, which most of us very identified on an unconscious level.
And depending on how much of our lives we've been living a lie too, like as we start to wake up, like we have to either be like, okay, are we going to stay comfortable in the lie we've been living? Or are you going to wake up to the greater reality and allow our world to change? So it's really like, I remember, at a certain point, I was like a few years into meditating and doing yoga every day. I felt like I was at a threshold where like I literally could not go back to living like a quote unquote regular kind of like matrix life if I kept going the way that I was going. And I had to have the will and almost like the faith. And actually it was really connection to essence and the divine, which pushed me through that, because I understood that all of my old friends who I used to have conversations with about regular matrix things, like I wouldn't be able to relate to them anymore as much. I could relate to them where they're at, but everything was changing. My whole focus and interest was changing. So there's a threshold that needs to be crossed. And also a lot of relationships, a lot of maybe jobs, a lot of ways of being, as we retrieve back our essence, those things may need to necessarily change. And that tends to be what most people are afraid of. So that's why they hold on.
Exactly.
So let's talk about, sorry?
So I say just on you mean personality and essence?
Yeah, that's what we want to talk about.
Before that, let's just going back to, because the questions, what is inner work? Like, how do I do it? And people ask that. And again, from a very practical standpoint, before even, as Gurdjieff mentioned, even the quote I mentioned it before, and many other esoteric teachings talk about as well, before even engaging, quote, inner work, learn to observe yourself. That's like half of the ticket, so to speak, half of the battle already, to be able to disidentify with your beliefs, with what you do, with who you think you are, and observe yourself, the different parts, the emotional part, the psychological part, the thoughts, the physical sensation, and just observing. And the key point here is in observing is literally just observing, which meaning not judging it as good or bad. And you will see how right away you attach to pleasure and avoidance of pain. Your likes and dislikes, all of that. It's very mechanical. But can you observe it without judgment, just to see it for what it is? And also observing it without trying to change it.
Yeah.
Right? That's also key, even especially what's happening in the body. Just to this, it requires a certain, almost like,
it just requires practice and
curiosity and honest curiosity. That's how I pronounce it.
Yeah, and also
right?
to be able to catch yourself when you start to grasp and bring yourself back to the actual experience of it.
Exactly. And then observe thoughts, for example. Where are these thoughts coming from? Are these really your own thoughts? Right?
Yeah, I wouldn't personally get into a mental analysis about it, because it'll make it worse.
But just putting that you get into you can easily get into analysis paralysis. But on the basic level, you will observe, you will see if you're sincere, the interrelationship between thoughts and emotions and feelings. You have a certain thought, it creates a certain emotion.
Yeah.
And then there are certain scenarios are then projected into the future, some anxiety, fear, because of just something you read, like whatever, like the interrelationship between thought and emotions.
And then on the contrary as well, what we store in our body ends up creating the thoughts that arise as well.
And then so a lot of it, what we experience in the present, actually then you realize it's coming from the past. And you project it into the present, which goes deep into shadow work, triggers, projections, and all of that.
Yeah, so let's actually get into the process of inner work, and what that actually entails
in relation to personality and essence.
Yeah, I mean, we can conclude that as part of it. So I would say the process of inner work is the self-observation, self-remembering, bringing more essence to the front, or the psychic being, gaining connection to your true self, and basically doing whatever you need to do to get there. So it's different for everyone, but for what actually helps facilitate that work is, number one, the self-remembering, self-observation, is learning how to just take time, close your eyes, feel what you're feeling, and notice what arises. That's the beginning starting point for everyone. Yeah. And then deepen that practice over time, And some people, I also have to say, naturally have that function within them, people who are very like Virgo archetype type people, or even the Scorpio archetype, they're like, for me, like
Plutonian.
That was been my own, even as a child, I remember just like asking like, why is this like this? And just constantly trying to like understand the why of myself and reality. So there's some people who are actually more inclined for that, And then there's other people who are like waking up to that kind of way of being, because what's going on in the world has thrown them out of their comfort zone, So we have to begin with that genuine curiosity and genuine desire to want to, really understand ourselves and improve our relationship with essence, and our true self. And that's where it begins. You have to really want it. Otherwise, if you just want to do it just because you think you're going to get something out of it, you're just going to end up strengthening your ego. Basically, you're going to find all sorts of ways to deceive yourself from actually seeing the things that you really want to know. So you have to really want it, because really wanting it will help you go through the necessary pain that will come up. Because honestly, every single time before I meditate, I'm like not wanting to do it. Like, and I've been doing this for years, so it never gets really much easier, but it gets better in the sense that you actually end up cutting off patterns that you've been living with your whole life.
Yeah. So also then, reminds me of something what you just shared. A lot of people always ask, can you give me some suggestions what to read, what books to read here and there? And on that note, I want to reference a couple of essays on my website, which ties exactly in this topic if you haven't read it yet. One of it is The Perilous Path Towards Awakening. It's under my article section on my website, veilofreality.com. It's also available as an ebook, where you go deeper also in the traps on the path towards awakening or in self-work, which the ego then hijacks the process, as you just mentioned as well.
Yeah, the ego, and this happens automatically. So anytime you have like an an experience of higher consciousness, a quote unquote enlightenment peak experience, the ego will automatically, within a millisecond later, want to identify with it and be like, oh, this means I'm special. This means I'm this. It happens automatically. So just one practice to do is to just observe the ego as it tries to do that, and then that's how you can also, again, defeat this process of like wanting to attach to peak experiences.
And not identifying again.
Exactly,
with it, right?
Exactly. And also one practical tip for that and the ego hijacking experiences is create the container. So if you have a deep spiritual experience, ideally do not write about it for at least like 72 hours or more, depending on the strength of it. Like when I went through really intense ayahuasca experiences, I didn't write about it for like months, maybe even a year after. So create the container to watch it unfold, because the moment that you want to share it and be like, oh my God, I'm enlightened now, I healed my shadow or whatever, the moment you're actually not as far gone as you think you are. Because again, what is driving that need to get validated from the outer world? It's the ego, And honestly, like these experiences, they take a while to integrate, and you should also check yourself. So if you have an experience of like finally contacting the self or experiencing some non-dual type of awareness, let it marinate and see how much you can ground that into your consciousness.
Yeah, exactly. And then I also want to just expand on what you just said, the importance of truly committing to it. And what I mentioned, what I just alluded to before, a lot of people ask me what any books I can suggest to read, and my answer is usually the same. I don't know who you are on an individual level, what your process is, where you're at, right? I can, like all the books I reference, I quote in my writings, right? It's a big variety, is, also a reflection of my own path. In that sense, like I can see then there's also interrelationship. The more you, on a spiritual esoteric level, the more you truly commit, it's an esoteric law. The more you truly commit 100%, like to the path, I wanted to know myself. That sincerity opens doors where there haven't been doors before. Mm-hmm. That sincerity opens guidance.
Yes.
Right. So the right teaching book will appear at the right moment for you if you are sincere.
That's
and that,
true.
as it happens to me. So I can give you suggestions, but these are also, or even if you read many of my essays or articles on my website, I quote many different authors and teachers. If there's something it really draws you in and want to learn more about it, follow that. Get that book. Get, the book itself where the excerpt is from. Mm-hmm. So that's all I can say, because I can see even right now I'm diving deep into Sri Aurobindo's work and H. Alma. So that's kind of like really highlighting my path right now. Yeah,
most books that have really helped me have been because I was able to follow the call of my soul to go deeper within it. It's not because anyone told me. In fact, when I first found out about Tibetan meditation through Reggie Ray, someone sent me like an audiobook of like his whole of one of his audiobooks, and I let it sit for months. And then one day out of nowhere, when I was living at the Eco Village, I was like, I'm going to start listening to this when I'm gardening. And then I was like, oh my God, he's talking so slow. This is really boring, And it didn't really land with me. And then another moment happened where I was like literally at a moment of like really crisis, and I was like, okay, I'm going to check out this meditation. And then that's when there was a turning point in my life. So also understand that sometimes what we most need, there could be a lot of inner resistance towards it. So we also have to be able to work through that, And even I see when I do astrology charts for people and I'm like, all right, okay, like it's some fourth house, trauma going on, stuff in the home and family. Look at your relationship with your parents, and it's exactly the thing that they don't want to do, you know? So we often...
That's a key point.
Yeah, basically the thing we most often need is most often the thing that we're the most resistant to as well.
Yeah.
And
then we try to easy way out, and you know what I mean? And all of that.
Yeah, and bargain. And
bargain. But that commitment is key, because then, there's also the saying, there's truth to it, the teacher appears when the student is ready. And the student is ready also ties to this sincere, that commitment to the path, right? That opens the doors. Similar in the biblical saying, many are called, few choose to answer the call. Like truly, yes, I want to commit to it. It reminds me also what Adyashanti said. I think we quoted this part of him before, paraphrasing him. He says a lot of people want to awaken, but what they really want is to be happy in their dream life.
Yeah.
Right. So they have certain conditions of how they want their awakening to be, what they want to look into, but not look into that, and kind of don't realize, how mechanical they still are in their nature and even in their choosing. So to speak. That's why we can talk about this as well, that there's only so much self-work you can do on your own.
Yeah.
In fact, it's impossible to do it all by yourself.
No, that's the key thing. And I also, for me, I can just share from my own personal experience. I was sent to a therapist when I was 5. So and throughout my life, I had really bad experiences with therapists, because either I was being forced to it, or actually what would come up a lot, since my own kind of Scorpio ego got triggered, I was like, these people don't know shit about themselves. Like, that's how I was feeling when I went to go see therapists. And a lot of therapists actually, it was partially on my own rebellious teenage ego, but then the part of me was also being like, there's a severe lack of like good therapists out there, right? But my journey started accelerating. So basically I had huge trust issues around going to see a therapist and sharing my own intimate parts of myself with a therapist. But once I got over that barrier, and I started working with, first I started working with this woman healer at this eco village. I worked with some of the people you worked with who are kind of coach styles. And now I'm working with this astrologer, but the more that I leaned into that discomfort, and the discomfort comes up because, all of your trust issues, all of your issues of abandonment, all of your core wounds will come up in the context of working with someone who's really great one-on-one.
Who will trigger you, actually.
Who will trigger you, exactly. And that's why, it's also about finding the right match as well. Like, I'm not the right match for everyone. You're not the right match for everyone. But for the people we are the right match for, we're great for, So you also need to find the right match within you. And then also understanding on a basic level, this process of transference and countertransference. So when you're in a relationship one-on-one with someone, whether it's a therapist or it's a partner, all of your old stuff from your family, your opposite sex parent or your same sex parent will come up regarding them. That's just the process. And also, you need to be strong enough to witness this, and the person that you're working with has to be strong enough to witness this and then not have their own countertransference get in the way. Exactly. So that's the process. And for me, I've always, and I wrote about this on Facebook, I personally tend to seek out wounded healers more than people with degrees and stuff. And because I've gone and seen some of the best psychiatrists and even therapists that are out there. And
what do you mean the best with the
meaning
the
most credentials,
right.
The best schools or whatever. And I know that they're out there, and I don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. Even the astrologer that I work with is a trained therapist, but for me, I need a specific person, I need a person who's basically gone as deep as I want to go. And so that's exactly. So that's the thing personally to look for is again, this is not something they teach in a lot of conventional therapy programs, but this is something they talk about in IFS. This is also something A.H. Almas alludes to, is what is the relationship that the therapist has with their own self and their own essence. Mm-hmm. So if the therapist is operating from a personality structure, they're only going to be relate to us on the level of personality.
And they may try to refine the personality.
Yeah, but the best therapists out there, or best coaches or best healers or whatever you want to call them, are in touch with essence and are in touch with their own self. And that's where the healing happens. Right.
So on that note, that's for our listeners, before also we end the first hour, let's go deep into, because that can be confusing for a lot of people, as it was for me as well. The difference between personality and essence, right? To know thyself, because we always talk about it's about to know thyself, get to know thyself. And I see a lot of people then They claim they already know themselves, but what they're referring to is their personality, which is conditioned, which is, it's a program running based on identifications and beliefs and whatnot. But essence is all beyond that. So how can we define essence?
I mean, essence is pretty much everything you're looking for in the world. It's when you feel calm, courageous, compassionate, centered, joyful for no reason,
It's not depending on anything.
And so as we work through our wounds and traumas and conditioning, essence naturally more comes to the front. For some people, they really get in touch with, they've had experience of essence only in peak spiritual experiences, either with psychedelics or with doing meditation retreats, So, when you get like that feeling, like I'm sure many people listening have done like a yoga class where they left and they were just feeling like bliss and on top of the world. That's them in touch with essence. Basically.
And it's been, you can call it your true soul being, the psychic being, other.
And it actually feels more like a state of bliss to the extent that you're not normally resting in that state. So for most people, they're literally in a trance of like suffering, of unworthiness, of their own thoughts and past, and that's their general, that's the point of awareness, which I usually function in the world within. So sometimes through a peak experience, you finally get in touch with essence, and then you realize how far down you're operating throughout the world,
So exactly. So the key point is really to understand that, your essence, it's definitely not just it's beyond even like what also all various teachings talk about in esoteric masters. It's experiencing essence. It's beyond thought, it's beyond emotion, feelings even, right? It can somehow express itself through it, but it is not that. Essence is beyond even feelings and emotions and any thoughts. It's a state of being. And it relates to this calmness, courageous, courage immense of just like this true healthy self-confidence, which just doesn't depend on anything, on your accomplishments.
Doesn't depend on anything happening externally out there whatsoever.
So if you feel good and joyful and great because of what relationship in your
or maybe Bitcoin's going up.
Bitcoin's going, you're cashing in crypto right now. You're feeling, this is not essence. This is your personality, ego personality that's conditional.
No, it's for no reason. Like you meet people
essence.
Who are in touch with essence when they're really joyful and
Yes,
passionate.
you can see that it comes to their eyes. It's just like there's a certain state of being. It's just who
they are. Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
And we all have it to a degree, like extent undeveloped maybe as an infant baby, but then through the parental programming, social programming, essence is being pushed into the back.
Every enlightened being or any being who operates at a high state of consciousness, what we're attracted to within them is essence, and that essence is actually within us, and we've just forgotten it.
Right. So also then essence, in that sense, it's it even when negative, quoting what the ego personnel would see as bad experience is negative, essence is not touched by it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So if you can even still, that's the whole point. Like the only refuge to really, what everybody's looking for is this peace of mind, fulfillment, love, and all of that is essence.
Yeah.
But we're always looking through it externally because we have become disconnected from it. We have all these holes within ourselves we try to fill artificially with stuff, with relationships, with money and all of that. And it's not about renouncing all of that. It's just we're getting so attached to it that we think we need this to fulfill us. But it's like a bottomless hole. Right? What we're looking for unconsciously is connecting to essence, our true self.
And that's the whole point of psycho-spiritual work, to bring essence to the front. And that means you both, as Westerners, as people living in this kind of pathological culture, we need the psychological work as well as the spiritual work. It's really important.
Combining both,
exactly. And the whole point of it is to bring essence more to the front. And essence actually as well, if you want to think of it, is really just the joy of your own inner child before the trauma happened and before the disconnection happened, So that's the point, is like, remember when you were a child and you were just like, joyful and free and not self-conscious and just free to be whoever you were without this kind of, internal shaming monologue or the things that people develop along the way, so that's essence.
Yeah, even concerned. Like if you look at a young child, not wounded yet, or could, when it's playing, in the moment, just enjoying it for the pure joy of doing it without any expectation of why, without any reward or whatever, or reason for doing it, really. And also not giving a flying F what other people's bystanders think about it in that very moment.
Yeah.
Right. So that's where you're really like, what Joseph Campbell would also would call following your bliss. Right.
Yeah.
So, but you hit the nail on the head, especially this day and age. It's really important to combine both the psychological and the spiritual work. Psychological work without spiritual work always ends you up with your parents in childhood, and it also like gears you almost trying to perfecting the personality in a sense, right? Like polishing the personality. But we need to go to essence to bring essence forth, and that's where the spiritual work comes in, because essence in its purest form is the divine. It's the divine within. It's God.
A relationship to the divine, exactly, and that's what we're looking for. I know that Valentine's Day just passed. By the time we release this, a lot of what people are looking for in an opposite sex partner or the same sex, whatever floats your boat, is essence. They're looking for, remember, their essence. And the more you actually, do this deep psycho-spiritual work to recover your essence, the more that you no longer need these things. That's the thing. And that's the experience I had, when I did my first silent retreat, is I had this profound experience of divine grace. And it was actually just a recovering of my essence, where I was like, I don't actually need any of this stuff that I'm seeking to make me happy. I'm good like this. And if I can just foster this connection and this relationship, that's exactly what it is I'm looking for. And that's the point that we want to really get at. So in the second hour, we're going to really go deeper into this. We're going to talk about this theory of holes, which is what A.H. Alma's talks about, where we have these kind of holes in our nature, where we try and fill them in with, things in our lives. We're going to talk about the desire soul versus a true soul, which is more of Sri Aurobindo's teachings. The importance of embodiment, shadow work, triggers, trauma, emotional intelligence. And we're also going to talk about this inversion of natural law and how this relates to
what we see in the world right now.
Yeah, the anti-divine forces. So we're going to go much deeper into this. Do you have anything else to say about that?
No, that's great. Again, also, if you want to stay updated about our work, we have new offerings, we have new projects and courses lined up for this year. So make sure to sign up to the newsletter mailing list on my website, veilofreality.com. And also, if you're not a member already and want to become a member to have access to the second hour of this podcast or any podcast we have out, and also access to the membership forum on my website, also sign up to the membership. And, that would also help to support our work, Laura's and my work. If you really appreciate what we're doing, we would definitely appreciate your support. And you can do this as well on my website, veilofreality.com. And with that being said, see you all in the second hour.